The rusty padlock hung from the basement door of 609 Elm Street in Santa Cruz, California, for exactly 17 years. Neighbors had grown accustomed to seeing it there, a simple piece of hardware that seemed ordinary enough. But on April 24, 1973, when police finally cut through that lock, they discovered something that would redefine their understanding of family dysfunction and calculated evil. Inside that basement, investigators found what Detective Lieutenant Charles Holly would later describe as a workshop of human horror. The concrete floor bore dark stains that forensics would confirm as human blood, dating back over a decade. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, hammers, hacksaws, knives, each cleaned with obsessive care. But it was the cardboard box sitting on a workbench, carefully labeled pieces in neat handwriting, that made seasoned detectives physically ill. The padlock itself became crucial evidence. According to the official police report filed that day, it bore the fingerprints of Edmund Kemper III, a 24-year-old local man who stood 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 280 pounds. But this wasn't just any basement, and Edmund wasn't just any suspect. This was the family home where he'd lived with his mother, Clarnell Kemper, for the past 3 years. What police found in that basement would prove that the most dangerous predators aren't strangers lurking in shadows. They're the people sleeping in the room directly above you. The case file, now housed in the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department archives, contains over 200 pages of testimony, evidence photographs, and psychiatric evaluations. Detective Holly, who worked the case from day one, kept detailed notes that revealed how a family basement became the epicenter of what FBI profilers would later classify as one of the most methodical killing sprees in American criminal history. But the story doesn't begin in 1973, it begins in 1964, when a 15-year-old Edmund Kemper committed his first murders and learned a terrifying lesson about getting away with killing. What happened in that basement would challenge everything law enforcement thought they knew about serial killers. Edmund Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California, into what court documents would later describe as a household characterized by severe emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. His father, Edmund Jr., was an electrician who abandoned the family when Edmund was 9 years old. His mother, Clarnell, worked as a secretary at the University of California, Santa Cruz, but her colleagues knew her as a woman with an explosive temper and a talent for cutting remarks that could destroy a person's self-worth in seconds. According to psychiatric evaluations conducted by Dr. Joel Fort in 1973, Clarnell Kemper regularly told her son that he was a real weirdo who would probably end up killing someone someday. She forced him to sleep in the basement, claiming she was afraid he might harm his younger sisters. Edmund later told investigators, "She would say I reminded her of my father and that I was going to grow up to be just as worthless." These weren't casual insults. They were daily psychological warfare conducted by a mother who seemed to take pleasure in breaking down her son's psyche. By age 10, Edmund was already showing disturbing behavior patterns. He buried the family cat alive, then dug it up, decapitated the corpse, and mounted the head on a stick. When Clarnell found it, she beat him with a wooden spoon until it broke, then locked him in the basement for 3 days without food. Dr. Fort's notes indicate that this incident established a pattern. Edmund would commit acts of violence, receive brutal punishment, then retreat into elaborate fantasies where he had total control over life and death. At age 13, Edmund ran away to live with his paternal grandparents on their ranch in North Fork, California. Edmund Sr. and Maud Kemper were in their 70s, retired, and looking forward to peaceful golden years. Instead, they got a 6-foot-tall, 200-pound teenager with deep-seated rage issues and a growing obsession with death. Ranch life initially seemed to calm Edmund. He helped with chores, read voraciously, and showed genuine affection for his grandfather's hunting rifles. But underneath the surface, something was building toward explosion. According to his confession recorded on April 25, 1973, Edmund spent hours fantasizing about what it would feel like to kill a human being. He practiced on animals, perfecting techniques for quick, clean kills. He studied anatomy books, learning about vital organs and arterial pathways. When his grandmother criticized his table manners one afternoon in August 1964, 15-year-old Edmund calmly walked to the gun cabinet, removed his grandfather's .22 caliber rifle, and shot Maud Kemper in the back of the head while she sat reading at the kitchen table. But killing his grandmother was just the beginning of that blood-soaked afternoon, when Edmund Kemper Sr. returned from his afternoon errands and walked through the front door of his ranch house. He found his wife of 52 years lying face down in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. Before he could process what he was seeing, his 15-year-old grandson appeared behind him and fired a single .22 caliber bullet into the back of his skull. According to the Fresno County Sheriff's report, both victims died instantly. Edmund's confession, recorded by Detective Sergeant John Martinez, revealed the chilling calculation behind the double murder. "I shot my grandmother because I wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma. I shot my grandfather because I knew he would be angry with me for killing Grandma." This wasn't a crime of passion or momentary insanity. It was the methodical execution of a plan that had been forming in Edmund's mind for months. After the killings, Edmund did something that would become his signature. He called the police himself. "My name is Edmund Kemper," he told the Fresno County dispatcher. "I just shot my grandparents. I'm at their ranch on Road 408. You better send someone out here." When officers arrived, they found the teenager sitting calmly on the front porch, the rifle placed neatly beside him, still warm from being fired. During his interrogation, Edmund displayed a level of cooperation that disturbed seasoned investigators. He answered every question in detail, drew diagrams of the crime scene, and explained his actions with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a routine chore. Detective Martinez noted in his report, "Subject shows no remorse, no emotional distress, and appears to view the murders as a learning experience rather than a tragedy." The juvenile court system of 1964 wasn't equipped to handle a case like Edmund Kemper. Judge William Mudd sentenced him to be held at Atascadero State Hospital, a facility for mentally ill criminals, until his 21st birthday. The reasoning was simple. Edmund was a minor who had clearly suffered psychological trauma, and with proper treatment, he could potentially be rehabilitated. Dr. Vanasek, the court-appointed psychiatrist, wrote in his evaluation, "Subject appears to have committed these acts as a result of severe family dysfunction. With intensive therapy, there is reason for cautious optimism regarding his rehabilitation." What happened at Atascadero would prove that sometimes the system designed to help creates monsters instead. Edmund quickly learned that the path to freedom required him to become an expert actor. He attended therapy sessions religiously, memorized the right phrases about remorse and rehabilitation, and convinced his doctors that he was making remarkable progress. Dr. Vanasek's progress notes show a patient who seemed genuinely transformed by treatment. But Edmund was studying more than psychology during his 6 years at Atascadero. He befriended other inmates, learning about their crimes, their methods, their mistakes. He read every book he could find about police procedures, forensic science, and criminal investigation techniques. He was turning himself into the perfect predator. By 1970, Edmund had convinced everyone that he was cured, but his real education in killing was just beginning. On his 21st birthday, December 18, 1969, Edmund Kemper walked out of Atascadero State Hospital a free man. His psychiatric evaluation, signed by Dr. Vanasek, concluded, "Patient has made significant progress and no longer poses a threat to society. He has expressed genuine remorse for his actions and demonstrated strong coping mechanisms for managing anger and frustration." The California Youth Authority recommended that all juvenile records be sealed, giving Edmund a clean slate to start his adult life. But there was one major problem with Edmund's release plan. He had nowhere to go, except back to his mother. Clarnell Kemper had remarried and divorced twice during Edmund's incarceration, and she was living alone in a 2-story house at 609 Elm Street in Santa Cruz. The same woman who had spent years telling her son he was worthless and dangerous was now his only option for housing and support. According to neighbors interviewed after Edmund's arrest, the mother-son dynamic immediately returned to its toxic patterns. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, who lived next door, told police, "You could hear them screaming at each other almost every night. She had this way of talking to him that was just cruel. She'd call him names that would make a grown man cry. But Edmund had learned patience at Atascadero. Instead of lashing out immediately, he began planning. Edmund enrolled at Santa Cruz Community College, ostensibly to study psychology. His professors remembered him as an intelligent but unsettling student who asked unusually detailed questions about criminal behavior and police procedures. Dr. Margaret Foster, who taught abnormal psychology, later told investigators, "He would sit in the front row and ask questions that made everyone uncomfortable. He wanted to know specific details about crime scene analysis, about how killers choose victims, about what mistakes get people caught." To support himself, Edmund took a job at the California Department of Transportation, driving a state vehicle to assess road conditions throughout the Santa Cruz area. This job gave him something invaluable: detailed knowledge of every back road, isolated parking area, and secluded location within a 50-mile radius. He also began visiting police stations during his lunch breaks, claiming he was interested in a career in law enforcement. Officers found him friendly and knowledgeable, often discussing famous criminal cases with enthusiasm. But Edmund's real education was happening in the basement of 609 Elm Street. While his mother slept upstairs, he converted the space into what he called his workshop. He installed soundproofing material, ostensibly to practice playing guitar without disturbing neighbors. He collected tools, surgical instruments purchased from medical supply catalogs, knives of various sizes, and plastic sheeting that could be easily disposed of after use. During this period, Edmund also began developing his victim selection criteria. He wanted intelligent, attractive young women, college students who reminded him of the type of person who had always rejected him socially. He spent hours driving around the UC Santa Cruz campus, watching female students, learning their routines, identifying the ones who hitchhiked. In 1972, hitchhiking was common among college students, seen as an environmentally conscious and economical way to travel. Edmund realized this cultural trend had given him the perfect hunting ground. What none of these young women could have known was that the friendly giant offering them rides was using each encounter to refine his technique for the perfect kill. On May 7, 1972, Edmund Kemper picked up his first adult victims, 18-year-old Mary Ann Pesci and 19-year-old Anita Lucchesa, both freshmen at Fresno State University who were hitchhiking back to Stanford after visiting friends. According to Edmund's detailed confession, he chose them because they looked like the type of girls who would never give someone like me a second glance. Both young women were honor students, described by friends as kind and trusting, exactly the qualities that made them vulnerable to a predator who had spent years perfecting his approach. Edmund's method was carefully calculated. He had removed the interior door handles from his 1969 Ford Galaxy, making it impossible for passengers to exit once the doors were closed. He carried a concealed .22 caliber pistol and a large knife. His approach was always the same. He would be friendly, conversational, and completely non-threatening until the moment he revealed his true intentions. Mary Ann and Anita climbed into his car, believing they were getting a ride from a helpful local. The crime scene report filed by the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department contains disturbing details about what happened next. Edmund drove the two young women to a remote wooded area off Highway 68, where he ordered them out of the car at gunpoint. When Mary Ann tried to run, he shot her in the head. Anita begged for her life, promising she wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. Edmund's response, according to his confession, was, "I'm afraid I can't take that chance." He stabbed her multiple times in the chest and abdomen. But killing the two women was only the beginning of Edmund's plan. He loaded their bodies into his trunk and drove back to 609 Elm Street, where his mother was working a late shift at the university. In the basement, Edmund spent hours dismembering the corpses with surgical precision. He had studied anatomy extensively and knew exactly how to separate joints and remove organs efficiently. The crime scene photographs show that he arranged the body parts in plastic bags, each labeled with its contents in his neat handwriting. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who performed the forensic analysis, noted in his report that the dismemberment showed unusual skill and anatomical knowledge. Edmund had removed specific organs that he kept as trophies, storing them in his mother's freezer when she wasn't home. When questioned about this behavior, Edmund told investigators, "I wanted to possess them completely. Even after they were dead, I wanted them to be mine." The disposal of evidence showed Edmund's growing confidence and sophistication. He scattered body parts across multiple locations throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains, ensuring that even if some remains were discovered, it would be nearly impossible to reconstruct the full scope of his crimes. He buried the heads separately, in locations he could revisit when he wanted to relive the experience of killing. For months, Marianne Pesci and Anita Lucchesa were simply missing persons. Their car was found abandoned near a gas station, leading police to theorize they had been victims of a random robbery or had run away together. Missing persons cases involving college students were common in the early 1970s, and without bodies, there was little evidence to suggest they had been murdered. Edmund, meanwhile, was analyzing his performance with the clinical detachment of a scientist reviewing experimental results. In his confession, he detailed specific improvements he planned to make: better tools for dismemberment, more efficient disposal methods, and refined techniques for controlling victims without leaving evidence of a struggle. By September 1972, Edmund felt ready to escalate his activities, and his next victim would help him perfect his technique even further. 15-year-old Aiko Ku was dancing to music in her room at the Cabrillo College dormitory on September 14, 1972, when her friend convinced her to hitchhike into Santa Cruz for a ballet class. Aiko was a talented dancer, described by her instructors as disciplined and passionate about her art. She had moved from South Korea 2 years earlier and was working hard to improve her English while pursuing her dream of becoming a professional ballerina. What she didn't know was that Edmund Kemper had been watching the college campus for weeks, specifically targeting young women who fit his preferred victim profile. According to the detailed confession Edmund gave to Detective Lieutenant Charles Holly, he had refined his approach after studying what he considered the inefficiencies of his previous murders. This time he had installed child safety locks on his car doors, a newer technology that would prevent passengers from escaping even if they managed to unlock the door. He had also purchased a more powerful handgun and practiced what he called compliance techniques, designed to keep victims calm until he reached his chosen location. When Aiko climbed into Edmund's car that afternoon, she was friendly and chatty, practicing her English by asking about his work with the Department of Transportation. Edmund later told investigators, "She was so trusting, so eager to please. She reminded me of the type of person who had always made me feel stupid and inadequate, but now I had complete power over her." This psychological component had become crucial to Edmund's motivation. He wasn't just killing for the physical act, but for the feeling of absolute control over people he perceived as superior to him. The crime took place in the same remote area where Edmund had killed Marianne and Anita, but this time he had prepared more thoroughly. He had brought plastic sheeting, tools for immediate dismemberment, and bleach for cleaning up evidence. The medical examiner's report indicates that Aiko was strangled with a rope, a method Edmund chose because it was quieter and left less blood evidence. Dr. Noguchi noted that the killer had positioned the body carefully during strangulation, suggesting extensive knowledge of human anatomy and physiology. What made Aiko's murder particularly disturbing was Edmund's post-mortem behavior. According to his confession, he spent over 6 hours in that isolated location, not just dismembering the body, but engaging in what he described as experimental procedures. He was learning about decomposition, about which body parts provided the best trophies, and about how long he could spend at a crime scene before risking discovery. The level of methodical planning shocked even experienced homicide detectives. After disposing of Aiko's remains across multiple locations in the Santa Cruz Mountains, Edmund drove home and had dinner with his mother as if nothing had happened. Clarnell later told investigators that Edmund seemed particularly cheerful that evening and offered to help with household chores, which was unusual for him. This ability to compartmentalize and return to normal behavior immediately after committing murder would become a hallmark of Edmund's psychological profile. The investigation into Aiko's disappearance was more intensive than the previous cases because her dormitory friends immediately reported her missing. The Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department assigned Detective Sergeant Bob Burke to coordinate the search effort. Burke organized volunteer search parties, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and followed up on numerous tips from people who claimed to have seen Aiko after she left the dormitory. What they didn't realize was that their friendly, helpful citizen Edmund Kemper, who often stopped by the station to chat about the cases, was the person they were looking for. By early 1973, Edmund had become so confident in his abilities that he decided to take an even bigger risk. On January 8, 1973, 18-year-old Cindy Shaw and 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe were hitchhiking from the UC Santa Cruz campus to San Francisco, where Cindy planned to visit her boyfriend. Both women were students in good standing, Cindy studying psychology and Rosalind working on her master's degree in Oriental Studies. They represented exactly the type of intelligent, accomplished young women that Edmund had come to see as ideal victims, people whose lives seemed perfect and who would never willingly associate with someone like him. Edmund's approach had become so refined by this point that witnesses later described him as helpful and friendly when they saw him offer the two women a ride. According to the testimony of Sarah Martinez, a UC Santa Cruz student who witnessed the encounter, he seemed like exactly the kind of person you'd want to get a ride from, clean-cut, well-spoken, driving a decent car. If my parents had seen me get in that car, they would have approved. But Edmund had spent months preparing for this encounter. His 1969 Ford Galaxy had been modified in ways that weren't immediately visible. The interior door handles had been removed and replaced with dummy handles that looked functional but couldn't actually open the doors. The trunk had been lined with plastic sheeting and stocked with cleaning supplies. He had practiced his conversation script, casual topics designed to keep passengers relaxed, while he drove them to increasingly isolated areas. The crime scene report, filed by Detective Lieutenant Charles Holly, contains details that shocked even veteran investigators. Edmund drove Cindy and Rosalind to a secluded area near Pescadero, where he revealed his true intentions. When Rosalind tried to reason with him, offering money and promising silence, Edmund shot her in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. Cindy attempted to escape through the woods, but Edmund pursued her on foot and killed her with a knife, later telling investigators, "I wanted to see the difference between shooting someone and stabbing them. I was curious about which method I preferred." What happened next demonstrated Edmund's evolution from opportunistic killer to methodical predator. Instead of returning home immediately, he spent the entire night at the crime scene, using it as what he called his outdoor workshop. He had brought a portable radio, food, and camping equipment, turning the murder location into a temporary base of operations. The forensic evidence shows that he spent hours dismembering both bodies with surgical precision, separating useful parts from what he considered waste material. Dr. Thomas Noguchi's autopsy report noted that the dismemberment showed increasing sophistication and anatomical knowledge compared to previous cases. Edmund had clearly been studying and practicing his technique. He had also brought better tools, medical-grade scalpels, bone saws, and specialized clamps that allowed him to work more efficiently. The crime scene photographs show body parts arranged in neat categories, each wrapped in plastic and labeled for later disposal. The disposal method for Cindy and Rosalind's remains was Edmund's most ambitious yet. He scattered parts across 7 different locations throughout Northern California, ensuring that even if some remains were discovered, it would be nearly impossible to connect them to a single perpetrator. He kept specific organs as trophies, storing them in his bedroom at 609 Elm Street. When investigators eventually searched the house, they found human tissue in Edmund's closet that DNA testing confirmed belonged to both victims. Perhaps most disturbing was Edmund's behavior immediately after the murders. He returned home, showered, and attended his classes at Santa Cruz Community College as if nothing had happened. His psychology professor, Dr. Margaret Foster, later told investigators that Edmund participated actively in a class discussion about criminal behavior that very morning, offering insights that she now realized came from direct personal experience. By March 1973, Edmund had killed 6 people and felt completely confident that he would never be caught. But his next victim would finally provide the evidence police needed. 21-year-old Alice Liu was considered one of the most promising students in the UC Santa Cruz biology program. On March 4, 1973, she was hitchhiking to a study group when Edmund Kemper offered her a ride. Alice was cautious by nature. Her roommate later told police that she usually avoided getting into cars with strangers, but Edmund had perfected his approach. He mentioned that he worked for the State Transportation Department and offered to show her his official identification, which immediately established credibility and trust. According to Edmund's confession, Alice was different from his previous victims because she was more observant and asked specific questions about his car and his route. She noticed that the door handles were different, he told Detective Lieutenant Charles Holly. She asked why they looked broken. I could tell she was starting to get suspicious. This presented Edmund with a new challenge: how to maintain control over someone who was actively questioning his story. Edmund's solution was to accelerate his timeline. Instead of driving to his usual remote location, he pulled into a secluded area near the UC Santa Cruz campus and immediately revealed his weapon. Alice's response was to fight back aggressively, scratching Edmund's face and attempting to grab the gun. The struggle lasted several minutes and left physical evidence that would later prove crucial to the investigation. The forensic report shows that Alice managed to draw blood from Edmund's face and collect tissue samples under her fingernails before he subdued her. Dr. Noguchi noted in his analysis, the victim clearly fought for her life and succeeded in marking her attacker. This level of defensive wounds is unusual in the previous cases, suggesting the perpetrator encountered unexpected resistance. After killing Alice, Edmund made what he later acknowledged was his first major mistake. He panicked. Instead of following his usual methodical disposal routine, he quickly dismembered the body and scattered the parts in locations he had used before. This deviation from his pattern created an evidence trail that investigators could follow. Detective Burke noted in his report, the placement of remains in this case shows clear geographic connections to the previous disappearances. More critically, Edmund had gotten careless about cleaning his vehicle. When Alice fought back, she had bled in his car, and despite his efforts to clean up, traces of her blood remained in the fabric of the passenger seat. This evidence wouldn't be discovered immediately, but it was there, waiting for investigators to make the connection between Edmund and his victims. The investigation took a crucial turn when Dr. Robert Britton, a forensic anthropologist brought in to analyze the scattered remains, recognized patterns in the dismemberment techniques. His report stated, all 6 victims show identical cutting patterns, tool marks, and joint separation methods. We are definitely looking for a single perpetrator with extensive anatomical knowledge and access to medical-grade cutting instruments. Detective Lieutenant Holly began focusing the investigation on people with medical training, transportation access, and connections to the UC Santa Cruz area. Edmund's frequent visits to the police station suddenly took on new significance. Officer Mike Alufi later told investigators, he was always asking about the cases, wanting to know what leads we were following. At the time, we thought he was just interested in police work. Looking back, he was monitoring our investigation. The breakthrough came when a UC Santa Cruz security guard named Robert Chen reported seeing Alice Liu getting into a large yellow car on the day she disappeared. Chen had written down a partial license plate number because something about the interaction had seemed odd to him. The girl looked nervous, he told Detective Burke. The driver was this huge guy, and she kept looking around like she wanted someone to see her getting in the car. When investigators ran that partial license plate through the DMV database, one name came back that changed everything. The partial license plate led investigators to Edmund Emil Kemper III, and on April 23, 1973, Detective Lieutenant Charles Holly knocked on the door of 609 Elm Street to ask him some routine questions about Alice Liu's disappearance. What happened next would reveal the true scope of Edmund's crimes and lead to one of the most detailed confessions in criminal history. Clarnell Kemper answered the door and immediately became defensive when police asked to speak with her son. Edmund's a good boy, she told Holly. He's been through enough trouble in his life. He doesn't need police harassment. But when Edmund appeared, his behavior was strangely cooperative. He invited the detectives inside and answered their questions with the same helpful demeanor he had always displayed at the police station. However, Holly noticed something different about Edmund's appearance. He had fresh scratches on his face and neck, defensive wounds that matched the evidence found under Alice Lou's fingernails. When asked about the injuries, Edmund claimed he had been scratched by tree branches while hiking, but his explanation was vague and inconsistent, raising red flags for the experienced detective. The conversation took a dramatic turn when Holly asked to search Edmund's car. "Of course," Edmund replied. "I want to help however I can." But as they walked toward the yellow Ford Galaxy, Edmund's mother made a comment that changed everything. "Don't let them in the basement," she called out. "You know how messy it gets down there." Holly's attention immediately shifted to the basement. When he asked for permission to search it, Clarnell became agitated and refused. "There's nothing down there but junk," she insisted. "You have no right to go through our personal belongings." But Edmund overruled her. "It's fine, Mother," he said quietly. "Let them look." What police found in that basement exceeded their worst expectations. The concrete floor was stained with what appeared to be blood, despite obvious recent attempts to clean it. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, medical-grade scalpels, bone saws, and knives that matched the wound patterns found on the victims. Most damning was a cardboard box labeled Pieces in Edmund's handwriting, containing human tissue that would later be identified through DNA testing. But the basement revealed something else, evidence of Edmund's most recent crime. Hidden behind a false wall, investigators found the dismembered remains of Edmund Kemper herself. According to the coroner's report, she had been killed within the past 48 hours, decapitated while she slept, and then methodically dismembered in the same manner as Edmund's other victims. When confronted with this evidence, Edmund's facade finally cracked. "I was planning to kill more," he told Detective Holly, "but I realized I had to stop the source of all my rage first. Everything I became because of her." He had murdered his mother, the woman whose abuse had shaped him into a killer, and was preparing to flee California when the police investigation caught up with him. Edmund's confession, recorded over 18 hours of interviews, provided details about all 6 murders, plus the killing of his mother. He drew diagrams, explained his methods, and revealed the locations of body parts that had never been recovered. Detective Holly later said, "He confessed with the same matter-of-fact tone you'd use to describe your daily routine. There was no emotion, no remorse, just a clinical description of how he had spent years perfecting the art of murder." The confession also revealed Edmund's future plans. He had been preparing to drive to Southern California, where he intended to continue killing college students at UCLA and USC. "I wanted to see if the techniques I had developed would work in different environments," he explained. "I was curious about whether police in Los Angeles were more competent than the ones here." On April 24, 1973, Edmund Emil Kemper III was formally charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 8 counts of first-degree murder. When Judge Hawkins asked Edmund if he had any preference regarding his sentence, Edmund replied, "Death. I want to die. I have no desire to live in a cage for the rest of my life, and I certainly have no intention of being rehabilitated." But California had temporarily suspended capital punishment in 1972, so Judge Hawkins sentenced him to 8 consecutive life terms at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. What makes Edmund Kemper's case particularly significant in criminal psychology is what happened after his conviction. Unlike most serial killers who maintain their innocence or refuse to cooperate with researchers, Edmund became an eager participant in psychological studies. Dr. Donald Lundy, who conducted extensive interviews with Edmund in prison, noted, "He treats his own crimes as case studies. He's genuinely interested in understanding the psychology of what he did, not for redemption, but purely from intellectual curiosity." Edmund's intelligence and cooperation made him valuable to law enforcement training programs. FBI profilers John Douglas and Robert Ressler interviewed him extensively as part of their research into serial killer psychology. Their sessions, recorded between 1974 and 1981, became foundational material for modern criminal profiling techniques. Edmund provided insights into victim selection, crime scene behavior, and post-murder psychology that helped investigators solve other cases. In one particularly chilling interview, Edmund told Douglas, "The perfect serial killer would be someone who appears completely normal, maybe even helpful to police, someone who could insert himself into the investigation without arousing suspicion, someone exactly like me." This comment led to new protocols for investigating serial crimes, including background checks on frequent police station visitors and civilian volunteers who insert themselves into high-profile cases. The basement at 609 Elm Street was demolished in 1974, but the case files from Edmund's crimes continue to be studied by criminologists worldwide. Dr. Park Dietz, who has consulted on hundreds of serial killer cases, considers Edmund's detailed confessions the most valuable primary source material in the field of criminal psychology. The recordings of his police interviews are still used in FBI training programs at Quantico. Perhaps most disturbing is Edmund's current status. Now 75 years old, he remains incarcerated at the California Medical Facility, where he has become a model prisoner. He participates in psychological research, mentors other inmates, and has recorded audiobooks for the blind as part of a prison volunteer program. Guards describe him as polite, intelligent, and completely non-threatening. "If you didn't know his history," one guard told a documentary filmmaker, "you'd think he was just a harmless old man who happened to be very tall." But Edmund himself has never wavered in his self-assessment. In a 2017 parole hearing, his first in over 20 years, he told the board, "I'm a danger to society. I always will be. I should never be released, and I don't want to be released. Some people are broken in ways that can't be fixed." The parole board unanimously agreed to keep him incarcerated. The Kemper case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches serial crime investigations. The realization that killers could be intelligent, cooperative, and seemingly normal led to new investigative protocols and psychological profiling techniques that are still used today. Edmund's crimes also highlighted the dangers of premature release from mental health facilities and the need for more sophisticated risk assessment tools. But Edmund Kemper's story raises an unsettling question that law enforcement and psychology professionals still struggle to answer. How many other intelligent, methodical killers are hiding in plain sight, appearing helpful and normal while planning their next move? Next week, we'll explore the case of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, who spent 30 years working for the local government in Wichita, Kansas, while terrorizing the community he was supposed to serve. What would you have done if you were Detective Holly and encountered someone like Edmund at your police station? How do we identify predators who are intelligent enough to hide among us? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But remember, the most dangerous killers are often the ones who seem the most normal.